The title of the message today, which of course is chosen some months in advance, is The Sanctuary of the Soul. It seems really appropriate, doesn't it? And as I was walking in this morning, I saw the sign we have out there, which I rarely look at, that says, Sanctuary. It has been a time of unspeakable sorrow and difficulty and challenge. And I think we hunger for sanctuary. And we think of sanctuary, the sanctuary of the soul, even as being a place apart. Right? A place where we can get away from our challenges, a place where we can get away from our sorrows, a place where we can get away from the difficulties in our world. But in the past weeks, days, it has been very difficult to do that, hasn't it? I mean, even those of us who are meditators, practicing breathing, it has been hard to breathe. But there is a way that our teachings give us to find strength and to find solace during these times. And I want to say that I don't think we'll do it perfectly. And it's helpful to understand that. I know myself, I did not do perfectly this week. I tried everything. I meditated, I prayed, I laid down on the floor. Usually I walk outside, but I couldn't walk because of the smoke. So I yelled at my husband, which, you know, we've been together a long time, and I don't do very often. I'm just thinking I could probably count, on one hand in 25 years how many times that has happened. But then I thought I should get a reality check on that. I'll ask him. So thankfully he agreed. Maybe 5 times in all those years. I read a story, it's coming out of the new issue of Yes magazine, about a woman writing about resilience and how she was trying to find resilience in these times. And she said she just had a moment where she realized she had been so stressed that she hadn't been taking care of herself. So she said, I'll take care of myself. And she said, I haven't even taken my vitamins. I'll take my vitamins. She grabbed her vitamins and downed them, at least what she thought was her vitamins, until she realized it was the pain medication they had been giving their Rottweiler dog. And so she said she had to call poison control. And she said the person on the other end of the phone was so compassionate and said, don't worry, it happens all the time. And she said, I knew that wasn't true, but it was a moment of comfort and solace. So the question is, how do we find comfort? How do we find solace? How do we find sanctuary in such a time? I came across a poem by our friend Mark Nepo. It's from his book, The Way Under the Way. I just saw a handwritten note from Galileo. He was under house arrest for believing we're not the center of everything. Now behind me in the park, a dozen beginners of all ages learning how to juggle. We have to start somewhere. The young man who's so magical at this is asked to instruct. He smiles. He says, "You have to keep trying, just not the same thing. You have to keep trying, just not the same thing." Earlier, I leaned over a letter from Lincoln to a dead soldier's mother. This, just weeks after losing Susan's mother, sweet Eleanor. I kept saying her name to strangers. You see, we all have to juggle joy and sorrow. We all have to juggle joy and sorrow. Not to do it well. We always drop something. But when the up and down of life are leaving one hand and not yet landing in the other, then we glow. When the up and down of life are leaving one hand and not yet landing in the other, then we glow like a mystical molecule hovering between birth and death, ready to kiss anything. So what is it that is between birth and death? That is, of course, the true sanctuary, what we call the divine self, what our scriptures say, Aham Brahma Asmi, I am that. That space which holds it all. Birth and death, joy and sorrow. That which we are, that is the sanctuary. That is the divine self. And the question comes, how do we enter that sanctuary? How do we find that in the midst of chaos? We have to discern. We have to discern in the midst of all of it what remains unchanging. And what are the resources that we draw upon? I'm going to read from this book now. Our spiritual resources. This is a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. I do dimly perceive that while everything around me is ever changing, ever dying, there is underlying all that change a living power that is changeless, that holds all together, that creates, dissolves, and recreates. That informing power or spirit is God. I dimly perceive that while everything around me is ever changing, ever dying, there is underlying all that change a living power that is changeless. So a little bit from this tome. I was listening with rapt attention to global peace activist Ila Gandhi, granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, and former member of South African Parliament, speak about the struggle and victory of the people of South Africa to overcome the oppression of apartheid and the necessity to continue to work with nonviolent methods to bring positive change to our world today. She talked about the assassination and loss of her beloved grandfather decades earlier in India, about witnessing the brutality of the apartheid system in South Africa and grieving the death of one of her sons who was killed during the resistance, and about being subjected to 9 years of house arrest, in spite of all that, continuing her work for peace. She noted that those in power at the time had abundant wealth and resources at their disposal. I could feel my heart ache as I thought about all she had been through. It was unimaginable to me. I asked her, how did you do it? How did you keep your strength and not lose hope? She replied, we were not discouraged because we had spiritual resources. I could hear in her voice and sense in her presence the conviction of faith that stands on the power of truth, with a capital T. The divine power that can be accessed to meet every real need and bring to fruition the highest good. This is the wealth that is enduring and unfailing. Since hearing her profound testimony, that phrase has remained with me. We were not discouraged because we had spiritual resources. It has come back to me time and again as witness to the truth that we are all sustained by spiritual resources. We know how to access our material resources and how to evaluate the worth of our skills and talents. A look at the bottom line on our bank statement, at our annual income tax return, or at the resume all give us an indication of what we can bank on. But how do we assess our spiritual resources? What does it mean to rely on them, and how do we do it? How can we rely on what we cannot see, cannot measure, or contain? There are no walls or borders in absolute reality. Nothing separates us from that. To rely on our spiritual resources, we realize this unity. So how do we get there? How do we change our consciousness to be open to and aware of our spiritual resources? We discern that they're there. We have faith that they're there. And in times that are difficult, like we have been experiencing, I think we need to feel what we feel deeply and not try to push it aside. The more we try to push it aside, the worse it gets. So we need to feel what we feel deeply, but we must not despair. So I think that we need to experience whatever we feel, anger, frustration, grief, any of that. Feel it. But do not let it be a wall. Let it be a door. Let it be a door that you can go through, that you can discern what is beyond. What is beyond that feeling? What is beyond change? What is beyond destruction? What is beyond sorrow? And there we enter the sanctuary of the soul. So it requires courage, it requires discernment, it requires strength. In the Bhagavad Gita, we We have a beautiful teaching that says you must lift yourself by yourself. And that doesn't mean that you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's not, take your small self and with all your might and all your will, take it on. It's a beautiful saying. You must lift yourself by yourself, but the self that lifts us is a capital S. It is that divine self, the true self. So you must lift yourself from your sorrow, from your anger, from your confusion, by yourself, your higher self. So then, of course, how do we do that? I can tell you how I saw it happen with me after I yelled. I could not find my way into the depths of the sanctuary of the soul, into the depths of the sanctuary of the self, until I began to think about you. Until I stopped thinking about how I felt, what was troubling me. I began to think about how you were feeling. I began to think about our whole extended community around the world, what people were experiencing. So I sat down and I began to write to you. I wrote the letter, hopefully arrived in your inbox. And I found that the truth is this sanctuary of the self, capital S self, is not a place of isolation, because the self that we want refuge in is the self of all. There's one divine self, one life, one reality. So to lift ourselves by the self is to enter into the sanctuary of the self that is in the world, that is the heart and the life of all. So in order to lift ourselves, we begin to think, what is the one small thing I can do that will lift someone else? When I began to think about you and what I could possibly offer you, what I could possibly say to you, I could tell you about the 2 doves that landed in my garden in the morning. It made me think of time in South Africa and this story of Mrs. Gandhi, who coincidentally happens to be showing up. So when we begin to think about what can I give, what can I offer, we also begin to look at what is showing up, not only what has been lost, what has been taken away, but what has been given in this time. So I had 2 beautiful birds who came to the garden. We have had and are having during this time at our center this great sort of migration of doves. We had Swami Nirvanananda, we had Swami Bodhananda, we have Bhikkhu Sangasena, we have Ila Gandhi. In this short period of time, isn't it amazing? So when we begin to ask, what can I give? And it doesn't ever have to be anything huge. It's never huge. That's always the ego that thinks, what is the huge thing I can do? But what is the small thing I can do? Then we begin to be lifted out of our confusion, out of our sorrow, because we have gone from the small self into the self of all. So, as I was thinking about sharing this with you on my way in this morning, I remembered a song that we have sung together, which likely I will sing off key, but you will help me. So maybe we can sing it. I'll sing it first off key, you'll sing it back off key to me. And then we'll maybe get to sing it together. But it goes like this. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. And with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. And with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Shall we do it again off key? Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. And with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for